I'm just going to talk about, Josh and I are going to talk today about some artworks that we've made that are about the sea and that deal with issues of climate change. And I've been collaborating with climate scientists and scientists, all kinds of scientists, for about the last 7 years, because my main research impetus has been about the biggest issue that's ever faced humanity, climate change. And so I've become aware, as I guess all you are, about the incredible challenge that it is, and we've seen with the media and in political parties that all this amazing scientific data that I've been working with, that's collected by all these incredible scientists, is being misinterpreted and not presented in a way that is able to be understood by the general public. And so that's the kind of impetus for the creation of my artworks. So I've been working in the form of transmedia installations, and that is interactive installation art that uses a whole range of innovative technologies, including multiple channel video, tangible user interface, interactive sounds, and you'll see these in the two projects that I'm going to be talking about. And I think, unlike words that can be easily manipulated by journalists and politicians, the great thing about the power of art and interactive media is it can present work in a much more honest and direct way to the larger community. So our work comes very much out of a large international movement of artists creating work in response to climate change, and we've been working, it's amazing, like the connections, just actually meeting Josh and presenting our work that are happening here in Australia and all around the world at the moment. The first project I'd like to talk about is Antarctica, and it deals with the sea in Antarctica, largely ice. And in this project, I collaborated with scientists and the Australian Antarctic Division, who gave me unlimited access to their video and audio, which is really fantastic. The whole reason, I guess for me, that I wanted to create this work, it was all about the ice. And the fact that ice cores have our longest record of climate, and scientists have almost gone back around 860,000 years now. And during all that time, I'm sure you're aware that CO2 levels have never been above 300 parts per million, and now they're around 450 parts. So this fact alone was enough to kind of drive me to make this work, and I approached the Australian Antarctic Division, and it was funny, I gave this lecture because an academic was away, and he asked me, it was about sound art, which really isn't my field, but after the lecture I presented this idea to the students, and third year design computing students, and a group of students ran after me and they said, oh, look, Onaclov, we've been doing these degrees and we haven't really made that much, and we'd really like to work with you and create your project into Antarctica. So I thought, wow, this is fantastic. The opportunity to work with such amazing students and collaborate with Michael Bates, a sound artist, and Martin Tomic, an interaction designer, and so I ended up making a special elective. Our other urgency to make this artwork was because of increased rates of sea ice melting and the threats to sea level rise and challenges that will cause. So this is the first iteration of the museum installation. Inside it has a dome with a projection of a larger map of Antarctica with multiple channel films, and inside the dome users can go in and listen to Antarctic compositions and also what look at a data visualization which has been transformed in real time by other users outside, picking up tangible user interface objects that are also controlling and creating sound as well as manipulating the data visualization. However, the project changed a little bit from that initial sketch that we did. And this is a shot of the 3 screens that were playing in the installation environment. The central screen was all about that notion of the ice cores and the record, the most crucial temperature record. And we got this, it sort of hypnotized me. It was actually my favorite footage, which kind of surprised me because it was the most, I suppose, close up, especially because we had all this incredible aerial footage. But someone had, from the Antarctic Division, planted a camera down an actual ice core, and you can see that in the central screen. We had many shows of this work, including a show at Tin Sheds and a show we're invited into an exhibition called Beginning, Middle, End at the Australian National University. But our big show was at the National Gallery in Hobart at the Tasmanian Museum and Gallery, and I'll just show you a quick little clip from that exhibition. Firstly focus on the ice core, but then you'll notice that in the show we're picking up objects that are on a table that have actual Wii remotes inside them, and so when users picked up these objects, they not only made sounds, because we had this atmospheric sound which is actually all composed from raw Antarctic data. Would you believe Michael Bates is pretty amazing at making things sound musical, because the recordings that we had were pretty harsh. But the most important thing that the audience is learning is about energy emissions, and that was what happened when you picked up the objects. You could learn about through good and bad uses of energy sources and how they manipulated the data visualization on the table. The next project I'd like to talk about is Reefs on the Edge. Like the Antarctic project, it's funny actually, a marine biologist, Erica Woolsey, came to see into Antarctica, and she loved the work so much, she said, would you like to collaborate with me? I'm going to an island called One Tree Island, and I'm going to be collecting data for my PhD. And I thought, fantastic. So, and because reefs are in such serious decline and 60% may be lost, I really wanted to communicate the message of her research to a wider audience. And it's just really interesting. A lot of people, I think, forget that, you know, coral reefs, although they're only 0.2% of the ocean floor, they contain, so importantly, 25% of all marine species. And I always think of them as sort of like the apartment houses, even though they're animals themselves that act as a safe haven for all these amazing creatures to live. Modern reefs are a result of stable sea levels, which of course are under threat. And even though ocean acidification is a huge challenge to reefs, and pollution, overfishing, we were examining the effect of temperature, which is also a really on the survivorship of young corals, and in particular a species called Acropora millipora, which you can see by Erica's. This is the data that she collected. It basically shows that, you know, after 2% warming, corals cannot reproduce. So effectively, they die, and then all the species that are surrounded by them do. This is just a shot of One Tree Island. It's a university, Sydney University owns this island. It's an amazing research station. Erica collecting Acropora. We also collaborated with Charlie Berrin, and he very kindly gave us images to use. I'll just show you some images of the installation that he took. Much more, even though I had a lot of diving every day, his imagery was definitely a lot better. This is some shots of the installation and a data visualization that's on a table using tangible user interface objects that either make the corals bleach or spawn depending on the user's actions. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll just show you very quickly. This is just a segment from the film. In this film, it was quite a challenge to make because we didn't want it to look like an aquarium, and we wanted to do something poetic, and we also wanted to evoke climate change, which is a pretty hard thing to do. Well, I found it very challenging. So we, in the end, got this really beautiful footage and images of Charlie's and videos and photographs that I'd shot. And then we decided to actually go to a swimming pool and put coloured food dye into the pool and use that as a kind of a gesture to, I guess, visually transmit the idea of pollution and decay and ocean temperatures rising and all these things that the oceans are suffering. So we I'll show you, this clip will come up in a second. And we also shot some jellyfish because we became aware of the fact that, I've heard marine biologists talk about the fact that they're predicting that every creature will die in the sea, except it'll be the only thing that'll survive is giant jellyfish, so no one will be able to swim because they'll be poisoned by their tentacles. So that's kind of what this little segment was about. And then you'll see some of Charlie's images coming in and the dye. So I guess we did use a poetic way of working with this. This sound that you're hearing was composed by Michael Bates using very dodgy recordings I made with a hydrophone on One Tree Island, and other sounds of water that he mixed. So we're just sort of playing with the notion of bleaching and changes in temperature and loss of species, and this is what we kind of came up with. That's a very short segment. Part of this work was shown in Berlin last year, and we've had quite a lot of exhibitions, including one later that we're going to have this year at the Exploratorium, so we're excited about that. And now I'll hand over to Josh Wodak, who's going to talk about his amazing work.
Hi there. Thanks, Onaclov, and thanks, Ian, for inviting me along today. So I'm also just going to talk about my background in terms of the work I've been doing about climate change in the past, and then talk a little bit about the collaborations which Onaclov and I are doing at the moment. So the first thing I'll talk about is the sort of my entry point and is sort of engaging with the themes of the symposium, particularly sort of the literary engagement with maritime environments. The first work I made about climate change was 10 years ago, and what it was a project I was doing in India with my background in visual anthropology, where I travelled the source of the Ganges from the glaciers you see up in the top left down to the sea over 6 months. looking at basically the transformation of water from a glacial ice source into the Gangetic Delta. So it comes, where is the laser? So up from about there down to there over a period of 6 months. One of the outcomes of that was the novel I wrote about that experience in terms of trying to position these things in more of a sort of basically like a narrative sense, for lack of a better term. My period with anthropology sort of stopped through complications of being able to go back and do the follow-up fieldwork, and I sort of, after that, moved into media arts and interactive installations. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the shifts between sort of direct representation of climate change in a more, if for lack of a better term, literal sense, and then more sort of poetic and evocative ways in which I'm trying to use climate data and climate science in the same ways that Onaclov has been talking about in her works. So this one that I first talk about was called Turulurulu Tuvalu. Turulurulu is one of the sort of, it's a folk, how would you call it, folk song from Ireland about saying goodbye to something. And it was part of the lyrics in Bound for Botany Bay, so it's got a particular sort of historical association with Australia in terms of the notion of saying goodbye to something. The one on the right, I'll talk about a bit afterwards, but that's where I've tried to basically look at the ways of representing the data itself about climate change rather than sort of the literal representations. So in this work, what I was trying to do was position the following 2 days of this symposium. We'll talk a lot about that as a shifting baselines or shifting baselines. So what I was trying to do in this work is really trying to draw people's attention to the horizon as this sort of critical shifting baseline through imagery that's, you can see the kind of thin sort of, Goldilocks zone within which a lot of these land masses are existing in, and how close, given that Tuvalu is considered the first sovereign nation that will cease to exist in a land-based sense because of rising sea levels. So these are excerpts from the series, and each one of the ones I've picked out are the ones that draw attention to those sort of minute passages. But shifting away from this, what I've been doing in more recent sense is trying to look at ways of representing standard Cartesian graphs, which, although they're very useful from an information point of view, they're not very embodied, they're not very engaged, and they're certainly not very visceral. So this is one of the main graphs that I use. What it is, it shows 9 human indexes: population, water usage, paper consumption, telephones, etc., and then 9 biophysical consequences of the various human activities taking place. The timeline is all since the Industrial Revolution, 1750 to 2000. And what you see is in all of them basically the same shape, which is going from bottom left up to the top right. This is the same data collected into the one graph. So for instance, here is species extinction, water usage, population, and so on. So in terms of taking that data and trying to present that in a way that has more sort of, for lack of a better term, meaning to people, one of the ways I've used is doing sort of community outreach projects of combining the human body with this data. So this was a project I did up at Grafton Regional Gallery, which is on the banks of the Clarence River, which is the largest river in northern New South Wales. And importantly, it's a brackish river, so it's actually very much connected, it's tidal, it's connected to the sea. And it's called Do You Believe in Diagrams, which when you say it phonetically is a question, do you believe in diagrams? It's kind of a joke about climate change denialism. It's the birthplace of the National Party, and I wanted to go somewhere that was... So what it is, this is a video excerpt. These are all people from the local community I'm working with, ages sort of 8 to 80, give or take. And I've asked people to use their body in terms of the Vitruvian man and to say that here is the past, here is the present, here is the future. And a whole thing of props. Blue is sea level, red is temperature, green is carbon dioxide emissions, string, paper, wool, stickers, and said, I want you to use your body to basically express where you think things have come from. Unfortunately, this video is stuttering in the playback, so where you think things have come from and where you think things are going to. And so there's an actual sense of agency of being able to physically use their body in a very standard Cartesian, time along the y-axis, height along the x-axis. That's the Clarence River behind. The other variable, as I said, go into the river to the depth to which you would like in terms of your statement about what's going on in your community, what you think is the issue of the day. And part of this, beyond the actual the click of the camera or the running of the video camera, a lot of this is actually the consultation, the dialogue and negotiation with people in terms of going to a community and working with people who have no association with the arts, which was very important to me. Farmers, teachers, school workers, council workers, that kind of thing like that. And trying to use these things that has a kind of like, if you like, for lack of a better term, a scientific representation to it in terms of the schemata of the Cartesian diagram, but also a highly emotive and visceral sort of sense of the situation at hand. These are actually still works in progress. It's going to be exhibited up in Grafton Regional Gallery next year in terms of making these video morph animations. The ones that are the finished ones that are the still photograph excerpts. So, for instance, this particular gentleman who is an ecologist who ran for council and actually very almost got in last year. That was his usage of the red and blue and green props. And this is a local high school student. And so let's try to sort of shake it up a bit in terms of the sort of ways of representing that sort of Cartesian graphs. This is something I'm trying to work on in terms of having a public billboard. This is the Defence Signals Directory, thanks to our good friends, the spy agency, the Defence Signals Directorate, and to have a public billboard in town, trying to showcase the sense of huge community interest and awareness in terms of getting these issues out there, literally in the public domain. It's something I'm working with Clarence Valley Council, but it's one of the things about the commodification of public space in terms of how I can actually work with them to physically be able to put that there. I'll just talk briefly about some of the other work I'm doing in this area. Yeah, sure. So these are two simultaneous audiovisual installations I had on earlier this year in Sydney. The one was called On Your Left, Facing Futures Free from Fear, and the one on the right was called I See a Bright Future. And they're about defuturing and futuring in relation to climate change. The one on your right was commissioned for the International Symposium of Electronic Art, so that was in the much more sort of high-tech, media arts sort of side of things. And the one on the right was through a research residency at Sydney College of the Arts. And what I was trying to do with both of them is look at ways of engaging people around the notion of, we're trying to think beyond decadal or century-based timeframes here. We're trying to sort of think in geological eras. Pratomos, the notion that we've actually shifted the geological era into the Anthropocene. This is one of the pieces of data I was working with. It's the most widely respected global greenhouse gas emissions monitoring station. It's been in continuous occupation in Mauna Loa in Hawaii since 1958. It's called the Keeling Curve. And this was in May this year when we officially passed 400 parts per million of carbon concentration in the atmosphere, which is the highest it's been in 3 million years. So what I was doing in response to that is this work here. This is called the Keeling Over Curve, and it's a 12-metre long hand-woven strip of photographs I took of biomes, particularly where the sea meets the land in far north Queensland and Northern Territory, so hugely along the Great Barrier Reef and then on some islands in Tonga. And like a tsunami does when it comes along and it basically obliterates and turns trees into matchsticks, I chopped up all of these prints into, you can see a little bit there, they're quite small strips. And then I re-wove them together to make what is two things. It is a heat map, so it goes from the coldest, darkest colours here into the hottest, brightest colours here. And then it's also, if you like, a map of sea level rise. And so one of the things I was trying to do with this, when the last time 3 million years ago, carbon concentrations were 400 parts per million, the average height of the ocean was 5 to 40 metres higher than it is now. Those numbers, like any numbers, 300,000 or 3 million or something like that, they have a sort of disembodied sense to them. So to have something where someone in a gallery has to physically crank their neck back in order to see the top of the thing gets more of a sense of 5 metres, okay, I'm standing in front of it, it's in front of me about that. The heat map was also a response to, in January this year, the Bureau of Meteorology added 2 new colours to the heat map of Australia for 52 and 54 Celsius. So I was trying to sort of play with some of the things is that the notion of we're off the scale, we're adding new colours to our colour palette, and how to make a kind of a sculpture installation which is trying to play with that colour palette. So that's just some other shots of it. I won't talk about it because we're running out of time. That was the other work where I was projecting the hockey stick graph, which is was controversial when it came out in 1998. What it showed is the average temperature in the Northern Hemisphere from 1000 AD to 2000 AD. And what I did is I mapped that onto the human body. This is 1000 AD, here is 1900 AD, and this is the 20th century. And trying to get that exponentiality relatable to people by actually bringing it back to their body as something which we all know well because we all live in our bodies. So just very, very briefly, this is the sort of working title of the collaborative research that Onaclov and I are doing at the Design Lab at Sydney University, really looking at what is happening in art, how are artists globally. We've just given you a snapshot, really, of how Onaclov and I are responding to climate change with our practice. But as you mentioned, there is a huge interest in the art community in terms of engaging with climate change. And we're particularly interested in exploring this in a maritime environment, particularly around the Great Barrier Reef. One of the things we recently did, we did a collaborative exhibition at Culture at Work which is a gallery in Pyrmont, the Earth, Water, Air, Fire, and that was really about trying to bring, this is some installation shots of the work that Onaclov had there. I don't know if you want to say anything about these. Yeah? So it was partly about putting our prior work together side by side in a gallery context and the symposium that was around that, and as a way to sort of think about with the sort of respective but also somewhat different background that she and I have in terms of how we're going to be working together. And that is it. Yes, thank you for listening.
Present work in a much more honest and direct way to the larger community. So our work comes very much out of a large international movement of artists creating work in response to climate change, and we've been working, it's amazing, like the connections, just actually meeting Josh and presenting our work that are happening here in Australia and all around the world at the moment. The first project I'd like to talk about is Inter-Antarctica, and it deals with the sea in Antarctica, largely ice. And in this project, I collaborated for the creation of my artworks. So I've been working in the form of transmedia installations, and that is interactive installation art that uses a whole range of innovative technologies, including multiple channel video, tangible user interface, interactive sounds, and you'll see these in the 2 projects that I'm going to be talking about. And I think, unlike words that can be easily manipulated by journalists and politicians, the great thing about the power of art and interactive media is it can. So I'm just going to talk about, Josh and I are going to talk today about some artworks that we've made that are about the sea and that deal with issues of climate change. And I've been collaborating with climate scientists and scientists, all kinds of scientists, for about the last 7 years because my main research impetus has been about the biggest issue that's ever faced humanity, climate change. And so I've become aware, as I guess all you are, about the incredible challenge that it is, and we've seen with the media and in political parties that all this amazing scientific data that I've been working with, that's collected by all these incredible scientists, is being misinterpreted and not presented in a way that is able to be understood by the general public. And so that's the kind of impetus for with scientists and the Australian Antarctic Division, who gave me unlimited access to their video and audio, which is really fantastic. The whole reason, I guess for me, that I wanted to create this work, it was all about the ice and the fact that ice cores have our longest record of climate, and scientists have almost gone back around 860,000 years now. And during all that time, I'm sure you're aware that